Welcome to Invited Back. I'm Sabbath Kapahu, and we are in a deep dive mini-series based on the sessions at Stimulate Summit. We're going to talk about understanding pelvic floor health today. I had a chance to interview a longtime friend of mine who I actually graduated from high school with way back in 2004 from Timberline High School in Lacey, Washington. We had done a lot of living and experiencing and traveling and learning and schooling, and recently reconnected back on social media. She has a doctorate of physical therapy and has really made it a passion of hers to provide education so that people can be reminded that there is a solution and there is help. Now, I learned from her through the conversations that the reality is there are people that are living with pelvic floor dysfunction on a day-to-day basis, and they've just learned to figure out how to alter their lives just a little bit in order to function. But what she really wanted to teach us is that there is an option for getting help. And there are so many resources available in order to do that. And a big part of what she does as a physical therapist is help people learn how to help their body heal. So things that are affected by pelvic floor health are incontinence, constipation, pain with sex, pain with menstrual cycles, things like this. And so especially for us as wives and as women, if there is even something a little bit off in an area of our pelvic floor, it's going to affect our whole well-being. And our whole well-being being a little bit off is going to affect our relationships. And at Stimulate Summit, we were talking specifically about the relationships between wives and husbands, but the reality is it affects your relationships with your communities. It affects your relationships with your kids. It affects really the ability to laugh without being worried of incontinence. It is a huge reality. And so what I loved about the conversation I got to have with Dr. Tao is she explained what the pelvic floor is. Now, if you're anything like me, I have heard this word, this term, pelvic floor, thrown around quite a bit. I delved a little bit into understanding what it was as I became a mom. I wouldn't say my first or second child. About my third child, I started to hear about Kegels, and that is really the extent of my understanding what pelvic floor health was. She helped me to realize there is so much more. She explained the pelvic floor as almost a foundation of the house. It's shaped like a bowl, and she showed us a diagram, and the reality that men's and women's pelvic floor is essentially filled with the same parts and organs and muscle tissue. And when there is something wrong with the foundation of a house, slowly by slowly, it starts to deteriorate. And if we're not paying attention to what's happening on the inside, we could say the same for ourselves. So if we're trying to build stamina for the long haul in our marriages, in our relationships, we have to pay attention to what's inside. And we talked about the reality that it is difficult sometimes to pay attention to that stuff because there is so much happening in front of us. There is so much to pay attention to that we neglect to think about what is happening on the inside. And we neglect to pay attention to even the little things. We think, oh, it's no big deal. But she was so encouraging in reminding us that it is a big deal. And that no big deal situation that could be part of pelvic floor dysfunction over time changes the way we're living our daily life. And if something is changing the way we live our daily life, it's a big deal. So where do we even begin? She walked us through how to bring this up with our doctors and practitioners, and she reminded us that there is no stupid question, and bring up everything that's going on. Don't leave anything out, because everything inside is connected. And I loved that reminder from her. Everything inside is connected. And if we leave a doctor's appointment with unanswered questions, we haven't given them an opportunity to do their job, and we haven't really done our job in taking care of ourselves. Now, with that being said, I will be the first one to tell you, almost every single time I leave your doctor's appointment, I have unanswered questions, because I just feel nervous, or I feel rushed for time, or I totally forgot to ask about that. So if you are like, that's me every single time, there's so much solidarity, you are not alone. Friendly reminder to call the doctor and make an appointment. Maybe you can even get a telehealth appointment if there's something small going on. Pay attention to the things that are happening on the inside, because they matter and everything is connected. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I learned from Dr. Tao. She walked us through diaphragmatic breathing, which I'm going to go over in the next video and episode. She talked about some resources, how to start the conversation with our husbands. Yes, they have pelvic floors too. And yes, there are ways that we can support each other in our relationship to keep our pelvic floors healthy and thriving and that foundation solid. She gave us some really great resources, so I'm going to share that again in the next episode. So just stay tuned. What my heart is for having these conversations at Stimulate Summit is to begin the conversation within your relationship, within your community, because another thing that she shared, which I really resonated with, is that when one person has the courage to say, I'm having this issue, it's a trickle effect. And your one conversation about this issue that you might be having that's a little embarrassing or a little taboo, or you're just not used to being able to have the conversations about sex with pain, about incontinence, about all these different things that are a real part of pelvic floor dysfunction, you'll begin to hear from the people around you that, oh, I'm having that issue too. Oh yeah, I have a friend who was telling me about that. And you'll begin to realize, really, you are not alone. And that is the heart behind the conversations that we're starting at Stimulate Summit. We need to have these conversations because it's a part of everyday life. And we need to be reminded that we're not alone. Don't forget about the things that are happening on the inside. And may you have space to talk about them on the outside. May you give yourself permission to reimagine what those conversations and what your physical pelvic floor health could look like. May you have permission to reinvent the way that we might feel shame when we talk about these things. Let's break through that into a space of inviting people into the conversations about the things that matter most. Stay tuned for resources and more exercises that Dr. Tao shared with us. I'll see you next time. Aloha.